Good evening, everybody. It is 7:30, so we will go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. We are here to do a deep dive into the rules of the road. My name is Neil McMahon. I'm a regional director here in the Lottieland region, Inland Empire, Los Angeles. And Dick Penny, the affiliate director, is also on with me tonight. So we are going to spend the next hour or so talking about the rules of the road. This is, I think, an area that we haven't spent a ton of time with in years past during the training, and we thought, based on a lot of questions and things that we've gotten, that this would be something valuable to spend a little bit more detail on, just because I think it is something that is historically a little overlooked by a lot of team managers. And so hopefully by going through this, you'll realize the value of that and spend a little more time kind of getting to know all the information in those pages. So we will stop at a couple of points throughout the hour just to kind of, get all the questions in. So if you've got questions, you can certainly type them in on the chat, or you can hold them until we take, like I said, we'll break a couple of times, and just anyone's got questions, we'll unmute and go ahead and ask those. So without further ado, let us begin. So, so what we're going to cover today, honestly, I'm going to go through hopefully more the value proposition of the rules of the road, as well as highlight some of the things that I think are particularly important. So really kind of what's in there for my team. Why do we have to read this stuff? It's, it's kind of dry. It's a lot of pages. I don't know. I can't seem to get myself through it in one sitting. Do I really have to read this stuff? So hopefully by the time you get to the end of this, you will realize that, yes, you do need to read this stuff, and that it is extremely valuable, not just to you, but to your team as well. They will get a lot out of this information. There's a couple really good spots in here. We'll talk about the DI overview, really sort of a soup to nuts summary of what the program's about, how it works, some really good stuff there. And then I'm going to go through kind of section by section what's in the rules of the road here, and then we'll finish up with a couple of ideas to really put this thing to use for your team, and hopefully get some ideas and some things out of it that you wouldn't normally think you would be able to get. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. So we'll go ahead and start just first off with, what's actually in here, and why do I need to read it? There are a lot of pitfalls that you can run into as a team by not knowing the rules. What you can do, what you can't do, different ways to approach things, different things that are prohibited. These are all things that are in these rules. And coming from somebody who has personal experience with this, I have been managing teams for years and years and years, and not in the too distant past, I should say. My team actually went and built something that was in direct violation of something that was in the rules of the road, and we knew it was there, but we didn't read them that year. Just thought we knew everything because we'd been doing it for a couple of years, and we got to tournament and we had an illegal solution. So that's stuff that happens, unfortunately, probably at almost every single tournament, and that stuff could be avoided by the team and the team manager, reading and understanding what's in these pages. So definitely take the time to read these, and then we'll talk a little bit about it at the end, kind of some other ideas and ways that you can use these besides just tactically knowing the rules. There's some great things that can come out of reading these rules in a different way. But some of the big pieces that are in here, there's definitely a lot about safety. There's some good discussion in here about interference, how to run your expenses and how to manage your budget, and kind of how to account for costs of things. Talks a lot about the tournament procedures and the scoring and kind of how that works, because I know that can be a bit of a mystery, especially if you're new. And I found even for teams that have been around for a couple of years, the scoring's still a little mysterious to them, and they're they're not exactly sure how it is. So maybe if they took the time and read that particular section of the rules of the road, might be able to get a lot out of that as well. So it really does cover anything and everything that you need to know as a general approach to this program. So so I've kind of boiled this down as simply as possible, because I know there's a lot of information. It's a very complicated document, I know, but there's three very, very simple steps to understanding the rules of the road. The first one is to read the rules of the road. And if I had us all in a room, I could hold up, I could ask, say, hold up your hand if you've read the rules of the road end to end. And there might be one or two of you out there, and those two maybe skipped over a couple pages because they drifted off in the middle of it. So you got to read these things. You got to read them all, and you got to pay attention. So the second step is you got to read them again. And then the third step is you got to read them again and take some notes. So that's my theme, that you're going to hear that through this whole thing. Read the document. It's all in here. I'm not going to give you all the answers. I'm just going to point to where the answers are sitting, and a couple highlights, and then you're going to need to go read them, and your team's going to need to go read them for themselves, because they will they all tell a story, and each team will interpret them differently. So the first part of this is there's a general DI overview. It's the first 12 pages that are in here, and really it's good for, I think, the teams to get through this and sort of read and understand, especially for brand new teams. It gives a great overview of what the program's about. It talks kind of there's like a quick start guide, gives you like a quick blurb on everything. Talks sort of about the process that a team goes through and how to solve things. And then it breaks down the difference between the team challenge of the central challenge piece. What are team choice elements? What's an instant challenge? It kind of gives you a real general breakdown of how the points get generated. Talks about things like your team number, and there's also some really good information there on page 7, talking about your team and how you can manage your team members, how many people you can have on a team. One thing that some folks may not realize, and we have this happen every once in a while, is that once you get 7 members registered on your team, you can't add any more, even if one of those team members leaves. So that's a kind of a procedural thing that's in here. It's very clearly stated if you read it, but if you don't read it, you could get yourself into trouble. And like I said, it happens all the time where somebody winds up, in January, and somebody's just decided it's too much, we don't want to do this anymore, and they drop out, and they've got somebody else they want to add to the team to make 7. They've already had 7, and so you can't add another one there. And those are pretty strict rules. We don't allow that to go past that 7. So that's just one of those little things that you can avoid by reading through this. Talks a little bit about requirements for team managers, kind of how the age brackets are broken out for the competition levels. Kindergarten through 5th grade, 6th through 8th grade, 9th through 12th, and university level. And so it's a great summary of kind of all the pieces. I recommend, actually, obviously the team reads this piece, but this is a great little section to give to your parents, especially brand new parents. It's very helpful. Like I said, it's 12 pages. It probably takes a grand total of about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to read through it. And I think it helps a lot just giving a high-level overview of the different pieces and parts of the program, and it kind of allows everybody to speak the language, if you will. You're talking about things like instant challenge and team choice elements and team managers and different things and interference and all this, and it's like, well, there's just a lot here. Reading through that is a good way to just get that quick training on how the program works and what it does. So that's just something that I've done for new parents. I recommend I give this to them and say, hey, look, here's quick 12 pages, take a read. Hopefully it'll help you out as you go through this and understand it. So definitely good stuff there. The next section here in the rules of the road is something that I do want to talk quite a bit about here, is about interference. And this is something, as team managers, I don't know if you ever really figure out what is interference exactly, because it is a moving target. It's different for every person, it's different for every team, but there are some outstanding guidelines here that talk about interference and how it works. And so one big piece of this is it talks about the interference triangle. And the interference triangle is essentially skills, the rules and the challenge, and then the solution. And goes through to kind of explain this to you, is that within 2 sections of this, skills and then kind of the rules and the challenge, those are the areas where, as a team manager, not only are you allowed to be and interact, but that's your job to interact and be. Every team needs to acquire skills. Every team brings skills to the table, and they're going to figure out what they have and what they need. And really, your job as the team manager is to facilitate them acquiring skills. Skills are certainly not limited to knowing how to make a costume, or knowing how to cut cardboard, or knowing how to work a power drill, or using some other tool. Skills go way beyond that. Skills go to time management and teamwork, and working together and being creative, and brainstorming and attacking challenges and making difficult decisions when not everybody agrees. These are parts of the skill set that you should be teaching these kids. And so that is certainly something that is not interference. And every year you talk to team managers, after they've been doing it for a couple of months, and they're kind of talking about how their team's struggling in the brainstorming region, or they're doing stuff and they're just not making good progress, and they're trying to get them to kind of move forward. And you find out that they're really just leaving the kids kind of on their own, and they're just sort of hanging out, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're really supposed to engage with them, get in with them, talk to them, help them through the process. The piece of interference where you need to stay out of their way and kind of out of their hair is when it's time to come up with the idea, and then when it's time to take that idea and physically put it into some sort of working reality. That's when it belongs to the kids. So when it comes to brainstorming and creating a solution and figuring out how to solve the problem, that's theirs. You have to stay out of that piece of it. And then when it's time to take the skills that you've given them and apply those to creating the final solution or creating the practice solution, that's theirs. It's their hands that are doing it. Now, if they're trying to, create something or work with a tool or sew, or, even just, learning how to properly use duct tape, you can show them how to do it. You can take two pieces of cardboard that they're attaching, and, you can talk about it, and you can put your hands on things and show them, but that's not the piece that's theirs. Once they see the skill, then it's theirs to take it and apply it to the actual, physical building, or the creation, that type of thing. So there's a distinction there. It's not a perfect definition, and there's gray areas. The thing I always recommend to folks is when you get into that area and you're not really sure, take a step back and just let them do it. If it doesn't feel comfortable, you're probably sort of skirting on the line, and you should err to the side of not interfering versus erring to the side of interfering, because that's the way this is supposed to be. But there's some really good information here about that. One of the other areas that it gets into real specifics around interference is acquiring materials. Talks about what you can and can't do there. There's some things in here that kind of talk about if the kids need to have, they need to buy something at Home Depot, like a piece of plywood, but they really only need half of it. You're still going to have to buy all of it, but if they only need half of it, and that's the specific thing, they're actually allowed to have the person at Home Depot cut the board in half, because that's a standard cut. And there's a definition in here that talks about those sorts of things, about, if you're, it's on page 14, 4B, and it talks exactly about that particular, instance. So you'll read through that when you get to it. But you're definitely to be involved here, and so this interference piece gets into that. The other piece of your involvement is just around safety, and we'll talk a lot more about what safety rules and what you can and can't do as a team. But really, in a general, you should always be aware of safety. So if the kids are using a tool or they're doing something that's just not safe, and you can see where it's going to be a problem, you should absolutely step in and say, hey, that's probably not the best way to do that. Here's a better way to use that tool, and give them some tips around how to use the tool, or maybe you're not standing in the right place, or what, this probably isn't safe what we're doing here. That is absolutely part of what you're doing, because we want these kids to have fun. We want them to take risks. We want them to get challenged out there, but you definitely don't want to have them be unsafe and for something to happen where someone's going to get hurt. So that's a big piece of that. The last piece of team manager intervention, or something that you should be doing that some people may think is have thought is interference, is around documenting what you're doing. You are absolutely positively allowed to be the scribe of the team. I have been the scribe of our team every year. Their job is to come up with the ideas. My job is to scribble them down on a big piece of paper as fast as I can. That way you've got a written record of everything that you've talked about. That way you've got an ability to go back, because I think you all have probably experienced it already where, there's a kid on the team that might come up with a really great idea and he or she can't remember the idea 10 minutes after they said it. More or less remember it 2 or 3 weeks later. And so that scribing, that writing things down is really important, and it's a really good tool, and it kind of frees them up to sort of do the brainstorming and get the ideas out, and then it's your job to kind of write it down. You're actually even allowed, and it specifically allows this in here, that you can actually scribe the skit for them as they're saying it. They can dictate to you, you can write it down for them. I mean, that's kind of, I think some people think, wow, that's sort of a, you're really kind of crossing the line there. You're not. You're just writing down what they say. Now, you're not allowed to embellish it and change it and do those kinds of things, obviously, but you're certainly allowed to write it down and help them along with that. So definitely don't think that you can't do that. And there's a bit more on interference in here and some different things, but that's definitely a couple of areas where you should read that and understand it, so that you not only aren't interfering, but that you're taking advantage of all the things you are allowed to do, so that you're making it as easy as possible for your team to succeed, and to have fun and get their ideas done and all of that stuff. So definitely make sure you're taking advantage of that. Before we jump into team budget and expense reports, Dick, I just want to kind of take a quick stop here, because that's the interference thing's always a big deal, and I think a lot of people have questions. Are there any specific questions so far that anybody wants to throw out?
I have one question. Is it okay to ask questions and improve the team's presentation without giving the answer?
So, yes and no. I would say, is it okay to ask the kids questions? Absolutely. That's one of your jobs, is you should always be asking them questions. But what you have to be cognizant of, and what you have to be really careful about, is that you're not asking a question that's loaded in a way that's going to give them an answer. You have to ask very open-ended questions that they will interpret. I'll give you an example. The kids they're building a car, and they're trying to make it steer. And the wheel on the left side is attached in a different place than the wheel on the right side. So it's making the car drive funny. And they need to make it drive straight. Okay, so you can see it. It's obvious to you. If you just move that wheel forward, it's going to drive straight, because they're all cattywampus right now, and it isn't going to work. Now, you could say, okay, is there anything wrong with the left wheel? That's a loaded question. That's interference. But what you could say is, okay, what's the problem here? What are you trying to fix? The car doesn't go straight. Okay, so what could be the possible reasons why this car isn't going straight? And then they'll start brainstorming, and more, most of the time they're going to come up with the answer, but you know what? Some of the time they're not going to come up with the answer. And guess what you have to do? You have to let them not come up with the answer. That happens, and it's frustrating as all get out to be standing there going, it's right there in front of you. Does nobody see that? No, they don't sometimes, but that's okay. The other question I heard there is kind of, can you sort of help with their performance? What you can do is you can, once again, you can give them the skills. You can teach them, when you are doing your performance, you need to speak loudly. You need to talk to the back of the room. You need to make sure you're facing the audience when you're performing and not talking into yourself. But what you really can't do is, while they're practicing, you can't go, stop. Okay, Jennifer, you got to turn around. You're right there. See what you're doing there? Yeah, that you can't sort of be that direct into it. But what you can do is you can constantly remind them, okay, this time when you're doing it, remember what we talked about. Here are our skills that you need to do. You need to speak loudly. You need to face the audience. And then you have to let them do it. It's the same thing. You give them the skill, but it's up to them to apply them. And there's a fine line there, I agree, and it's not the easiest thing to do, but you have to be careful. It's just like when they're building, think of it just like when they're building. When they're actually building it, you have to step back and let them do it. When they're acting, when they're performing, you step back and you let them do it. So hopefully that gives you an answer there.
Okay. Another question, if other parents are volunteering but are not team managers, can they scribe during the meetings for the kids?
Absolutely. So you may or may not, as a team manager, have parents that help, assistant team managers, call them whatever you want to call them. That is one of the greatest assets that you will have as a team manager, is somebody else to help you there. It's another set of eyes. It keeps the squirrely kids, a little bit more under control. It helps you get stuff done. It helps you keep those kids focused, because if you've got a full team of 5 or 6 or 7, it's just you can't keep them all under, moving in the same direction all at the same time. You need other people there to help. And so, yes, they can scribe as well. Anything that you're allowed to do, the other parents are allowed to do from that perspective. The flip side of that, because that's just something I did want to make a mention of, is that you have to make sure that every one of your parents understands this interference thing. Because, you'll see that where a kid will come back from a meeting after, you guys are trying to solve a problem or something. Clearly he's talked to his parents about it, and maybe his mom is an engineer and she's clearly given him some sort of idea because he's got this great idea, but he doesn't understand it. And you're like, oh, you can tell. Like, that didn't come from your brain. Somebody was talking to you about it and gave you the idea. So you got to make sure that they're aware of it too, so they're careful. Because the kids are going to talk about it when they're at home. They're going to take little things home. They're going to have homework sometimes for this thing. They're going to be doing things. And you just want to make sure that everybody's sort of operating in the same spirit.
That takes care of the questions so far.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's keep moving then. So I want to make sure we try and stay on time on this one. So the next one here is the team budget and the expense report, which is another area, I think, of great mystery to a lot of people. And every challenge, even improv this year, actually requires an expense report. Usually improv doesn't, but there is the ability to bring things into the central challenge for improv this year. So every one of them has an expense report that you're going to have to fill out at the tournament. Kind of documenting these costs, though, it can be tricky. How much am I supposed to account for the cost of this or that? So the team budget and expense report section is about 3 pages long, and it talks about all of the particulars that you can do. It kind of talks about how you should be accounting for the value of various types of things. When I talk about various types of things, we've got a few of them listed here. You certainly have new items that you go out and buy. There's certainly items that you've had laying around that are used, things that get donated, garage sale stuff, kind of what we call common supplies are in here. That's, rubber bands, paint, different things like that that are kind of things you're not using the whole thing, but you're using some of something. How do you account for all the costs of these? And I'm not going to go into the exactitude of how you calculate these things, but it's all in here, which is great. A couple of the other things that are in here that are highly useful are the things that are exempt from cost. Now, it doesn't mean you don't put it on the expense report. You have to put it on the expense report, but you get to put that it's exempt. A couple of examples of this are musical instruments, anything that delivers power. So extension cords, power strips, those kinds of things. You don't have to account for the cost of those. Those are zero cost. So anything that's delivering power to whatever you're doing, you don't have to account for the cost of those things. Same with, like I said, musical instruments, you don't have to there. There's quite a few exempt things like that. And you hear this at tournaments where somebody's watching another team and go, wow, that can't be under the budget. Look at all that stuff. I know how much those things cost. And it's like, well, a lot of times it's things that are cost exempt. And so they're using these things, and you kind of go from there. The other thing that comes up a lot of times is this idea of we bought it at a garage sale. that is one where you can find some great deals at garage sales sometimes, or people who have junk laying around, and you're going to pick it up from them. My team picked up some scrap this year that they're using in their solution that was a great find. And we're going to have to basically kind of go through and figure out what was the value of the scrap, because these things brand new would have been very expensive, but they were far from brand new, and they need a lot of work and manipulation to get them into a raw material that the team can use. So there's going to be a real translation of a cost of that when you take it from its brand new state to its depreciated state, to then they tore it apart, cleaned it up, took some pieces, threw some other pieces away. So what's the real value of that? And so you have to go through this exercise. And I will say that the idea of the expense report is not to sit there and go, well, you put down that was worth $5. I know those are $7. So that can't be right. The idea of the expense report is to create as even a playing field as possible for everybody, to really prevent a team from just going out and buying a solution. Because we all know you can go to Walmart or you can go to Home Depot and you can pick up a lot of the things that kids need to create some of these solutions. And you could spend $300 or $400 or $500 without any problem. The idea here is to sort of take the ideas of those things and recreate them in your solutions yourself, using materials that are not going to cost that. And so that's why there's a budget, to really kind of keep everybody in the same, in the same barnyard. So we have to sort of follow the same rules. So there are a lot of other things that are in this team budget and expense report part that I think you will find will be enlightening to the kids. Like, oh, we can't do that, but maybe we can do that. That's interesting. That happens a lot. It talks about different things that you can do, and then, like I said, there's things that you are allowed to do or are exempt equipment, other ways that you expense things that maybe the kids don't think about, and and that will drive that along. So definitely spend some time reading through this section. It is a great section. It is probably, in my opinion, one of the most valuable sections for the kids. So, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but, for the littlest of the kids, you're not going to give them this 50-page document and say, take it home and read it. You're going to have to spend some time going over it with them. Certainly some of the sections, you're not going to want to spend time with them because it's not going to be valuable or pertinent to them. But this is it's a good section. A lot of good information in here, talking about different things that you don't have to account for, other ways to account for stuff. So I would highly recommend that you dig into these 3 pages with great fervor and really digest it, because it will help you a lot as you're moving through things and you're starting to build and you're starting to create your solutions and you're concerned about budget. One of the things that it talks about in here as well is that you account for the costs of whatever shows up in your final solution at the tournament. So you may have built something 3 times. You don't account for the cost of all 3 times. You account for whatever the cost of the final version is. And for those of you who have been doing this for a little while, you know that these kids will run through some material sometimes. They'll try it, it won't work, they'll have to start again. If you haven't made 2 or 3 trips to Home Depot in one team meeting, you're not trying very hard, but it does happen because you break stuff, you run out of stuff, you don't realize that they're going to use that much material, and then they wind up screwing it up and you have to start over anyway. So you don't account for everything you spent, you only account for what you put in at the end. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing that's important as you're going through the exercise of brainstorming and the kids are thinking about things, this is a good area for them to think about. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's going to cost this. Can we do it cheaper? Is there a material that we could get that will do the same thing? Is there something that we can recycle, that we can repurpose? Are there other things that will do the same thing without us having to go and spend $15 on it? Because we could use that $15 somewhere else. So this is definitely gets right into the middle of the mix of the brainstorming and creating solutions and things like that. And it's a good source of information as well as, I think, inspiration for the kids. So definitely make sure you're spending some time there. The next section is the safety section, probably as equally to the team as well as to you as that prior section is, because within the safety guidelines, you know, like I said, this is first and foremost of this, is that the kids are safe. And some of the safety rules you may or may not think are relevant to safety, but your opinion of the safety when it comes to doing something that is, prohibited is immaterial, because if it's prohibited, it's prohibited. And I will give you a perfect example of this is when you look in the rules of the road, and some of you may or may not have them open, but on page 21 in the safety guidelines, number 3 is lasers and lights. Your team may not use lasers or laser pointers, period. There's no flexibility in that. If you have a laser pointer in your solution, if you have a laser in any way, shape, or form, regardless of whether it's dangerous or it's not dangerous, it is not allowed, and you will be required to remove it from your solution before you perform. Or if you're in the middle of your solution and lasers kind of break out of somewhere in the machinery that you've built, they're going to stop it, and they're going to tell you, don't turn those things on again, and if you do, we're going to, you'll get disqualified. Now, certainly some lasers are very innocuous, some lasers are very harmful. There is no gray area in that particular one, and that's just one example that's in here. I think a lot of the other ones probably make, really good sense. Obviously, there's no open flames, there's no internal combustion engines, there's no live animals, things like that. Those are strictly prohibited and they're never allowed. But there are also some other items that might be allowed depending on the tournament site. And so as you read through this, if you're planning on using something that may or may not be allowed, you're definitely going to want to check with your regional director and make sure that the tournament site is okay with that. A couple of examples of those types of things are like dry ice, helium balloons. We're starting to see latex actually now. It's actually in the rules because of some different concerns around that. So those are all different things that sometimes are allowed, sometimes aren't. So if your team's going to be using one of those things, make sure you're paying attention to that. These are areas where it makes sense to constantly, kind of go back to this every once in a while throughout the year and just make sure your team hasn't wandered into one of these things on accident. So, in October, you may know we're definitely not using laser lights. November, you definitely know we're not using laser lights. December goes and you kind of forget a little bit about it, and then January comes and you switch something around and you put laser lights in there and you forget. And then you get to tournament and you've got a big problem. So that's not a good thing, and trust me on this one because it happened to my team. You do not want to be in the check-in area getting ready to perform and have the check-in person catch something that's a violation of the rules. It's heartbreaking. And you will feel worse than anybody in the room because it's your team and you are ultimately in charge of the safety guidelines. So just keep an eye on these things. I just say that because it's easy to avoid if you're paying attention to it up front. It's hard to fix once it's already in the solution. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. There's a couple of other things in here. Use of chemicals. Chemicals are allowed. Different kinds of chemical reactions can be really amazing, can do some really cool stuff. Just got to make sure you're following the rules, and there's some guidelines that are laid out in here about how to do it and what you need to do and what you kind of need to document, that type of thing. So those are all important things that you got to kind of go through. Wearing shoes with solid bottoms is important. There's some things like that. And then the last one there on the weapons and violence, there are some rules here as well as some additional prohibitions here in California. You are not allowed to use a depiction of guns of any kind in performances. Excessive violence or gratuitous violence is highly frowned upon. We'll talk a little bit more a little later. Sometimes teams will step across the lines of good taste. And we have to kind of respect that, but that's something that you should make sure the kids are aware of, because I know sometimes kids, especially in 10 to 12 to 14, tend to sort of default to that stuff sometimes, like, oh yeah, we're going to go this, and then this guy's going to get beat up, and make sure they're just thinking about that kind of stuff. Like, is it necessary to the story? Because sometimes it is necessary to the stories. I've seen some skits where kids are doing some things that are, a little uncomfortable from a topic perspective, but what they do in there is really important to their story, and they want to tell it. And so, we have to let them tell that story, but just make sure that they're aware of it and they're thinking about it. Those are important things to kind of go through. And similar to the interference, if you're not sure, either go some other route or make a phone call, send an email to your RD, and say, hey, I'm not sure, is this going to be a problem with the safety rules, that type of thing, and then we can bubble that up to Dick. And honestly, if we're still not sure, we can take it up to the folks at at International and see what they have to say about it if it's something that's particularly nebulous or we're just not sure about it. So definitely make sure that you're thinking about these things as you go through it. And like I said, there are some very specific pages in here that tell you all about the things you are allowed to do, you are not allowed to do, and that type of thing. So definitely keep those things in mind. The last piece of that it talks about copyright infringement, something we just need to be careful with. Honestly, there are some exclusions in the copyright laws because we are in a closed performance, not charging money, that generally there isn't copyright. So I have not seen it be a problem, but if they're going to just be playing some Disney music in the background, Dick, I don't know if we would ever stop one because of copyright infringement, but just something that we want to be aware of and make sure that they're being as original as possible when they create their solutions, rather than borrowing from something that's already been made and putting it directly into their skit. So this kind of last thing to keep in mind there. So next piece we have here is clarifications. Without a doubt, the most underused tool that you have as a team manager is clarifications.
Before we go into clarifications, we have a couple questions here that.
Oh, great. Okay. Perfect.
In estimating the cost of partial used items, like a small portion of a can of paint, should that be decided by the team members, or can the team manager help with?
I would say that you as the team manager absolutely can help in this, because more than likely you're the one that went and got it. You are allowed as the team manager to go buy the things they tell you that they need. So how much things cost. You're aware of how much things cost. So typically it's a good place to have that discussion as you're moving along, and then when you get closer to tournament, having the kids kind of go through their solution and make a list of everything that's in there, and then you guys can kind of work through it and create your budget as you go. As we're working through things here, I'm always kind of keeping a mental tally in my head of, well, there's these things and that thing, and we use this much wood, and we use that much of this, and we have these screws and this, so we're always kind of keeping a general idea of it there, and making sure that we're being as frugal as possible. But yeah, I would say it's definitely something to engage the kids in a collective discussion between you and them.
Here's another question. Is it safe to assume that it can't be allowed or mentioned, that if it can't be allowed or mentioned in the rules of the road, then you can do it, in other words?
So similar to everything else, if it's not prohibited, can you do it? As a general answer, I would say yes. Kind of as a team manager, when you're getting into some areas that might be a little bit outside, a little bit out on the fringes, once again, if you think it might be a problem and you're just not sure, send an email. Quick email is great. Just send to the RD, hey, my kids are thinking about doing this. Do you think it's going to be a safety problem? Because generally, as we get into clarifications, you're not going to necessarily get the answer there. It's going to be something that's probably better suited to run through, the RDs and the affiliates to get those kinds of answers. But yeah, if it's not explicitly prohibited, generally, absolutely, positively allowed to be done.
Okay, and here's another part of their question. Also, is the $150, including material, noted in the workbook, or is it only for the challenge itself?
I'm not sure I understand the question as far far as so each challenge has its own budget. It varies from $50 to $185, I think, for technical challenge this year. That applies to everything that goes into your solution. So scenery, costumes, anything that you've built as far as like machinery, that type of stuff, that's what's covered by that budget. So I'm not sure what else it's being asked for as far as the workbook and things like that. So I don't know, maybe if you want to kind of clarify the question or open somebody's mic up there, Dick.
Just a moment, I'll open our mic up.
Put somebody on the spot here.
Yeah. Okay, it's Sophia. Sophia, you're unmuted, but her microphone is not coming up green.
It may not be dialed in, so.
It might not be. Oh, here she comes. She's here.
Oh. Sophia, I can barely hear you.
There's a checklist of supplies that you get. Is that for the instant challenge sessions in the workbook, or is that also part of the $150 resource?
Gotcha. Yep. Okay, so what she's referring to is within the roadmap. There's a list of some things around instant challenge supplies. No, that is outside of the budget. That stuff does not go into your budget at all. What goes into that budget is just what you have in your central challenges solution when you get to tournament day.
Okay, thank you.
That's a great question.
Yes, it is. It also comes up sometimes in some of the other challenges, especially the structure, where they are breaking structures. They're trying different things, and they can go through a large amount of wood and materials.
Yes.
And it's only what they use for their final solution that's included.
Absolutely. Any other ones for now, Dick?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Let's keep on going here. So the next part we're talking about is clarification. So there's two different kinds of clarifications. There are published clarifications, and then there are team clarifications. Published clarifications essentially are when the folks that are running the challenge, the international challenge masters. So there's typically a team of 2 that are in charge of the challenge from start to finish. So they are the ones that kind of clarify anything. They're the ones that kind of make sure that things are done right. They're the ones that sort of disseminate all the interpretation and everything out to the folks that run the challenges here in the affiliates, and which in turn then get to the people who are running the challenges at your regional tournaments, just to try and develop as strong a consistency across everybody's experience within the challenge as possible. So so there are times when they get a lot of questions, or they realize that maybe there's something written into the challenge that isn't very clear, or there's a lot of problems. So they will actually issue published clarifications. Those go out to everybody. Actually, I should say they're out publicly, so anybody can read them. They will post those on the DI website that you can go on there anytime and look by challenge, say, oh, is there any published clarifications, and see if there's something there. And typically what there are is they may just be like pointing out something in the rules that says, it says this. This is what that actually means. That's kind of the type of thing that's typically in there. The other type of clarification is a team clarification. These are private to each team. So you and only your team will see your clarification, your question, as well as the answer to your question. So, I would imagine, I've never been an international challenge master, but I would imagine that they probably get similar questions many times over in each year. But, each team's only looking at theirs, so they don't know that. So the way that you do this is you actually go on, and within the rules of the road in this clarification section, it gives you, how to ask it. Basically, you just go on to the DI website, destinationimagination.org, and you log into with your, if you haven't done that yet, that's where you were able to download your team, your challenges and your information and things like that. So I'll just flip over here real quick and you can see. So this is what the clarification screen looks like once you log into this. And so basically you just go in there, and if your team has a particular question about something in the rules, you're just not sure what it really means. Like, it could mean that, it could mean that. Does that mean we have to make it this way? Do we have to do it this way? Can we do it that way? I'm not really sure. And the team's not sure. Rather than just guessing and doing it wrong, or guessing and doing it right, and either way you're still not sure, is go ahead and send in your clarification. And so I have found some ways to ask questions that you will get the best possible answer back. Because what you don't have the ability to do is to do email exchange back and forth with the International Challenge Masters. They don't have the time to be fielding, email exchanges with all the team managers who are asking questions. So basically the way it works is you put a question in, you ask it, they respond to it. And so the better you ask your question, the better answer you're going to get back. So a couple of quick rules about those is be as specific as possible about what you are asking your question about. So don't just say, hey, we're not sure about this section, can you do that? Because you're going to get, basically what you're going to get back then is you're going to get, well, if you read the rules in section 123.2, you'll see it explains exactly what you can do there. Thanks, have a good day. Instead of, hey, this is what my kids are thinking about, here's what they did, or have them write the challenge question is probably even a better way to do it. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we think is right, based on what's in the rules, and like I said, and have them actually reference the section that you're reading and concerned about. This is what we've read, and this is what we interpret it to mean. Is this what it what it says? And so the more specific you can get, then they'll answer back to your exact question. What they won't do is they won't validate if your solution is legal. So it's like, hey, we're looking at doing X, Y, and Z. Is that legal? And they're going to, the first thing they'll say is, well, first of all, can't validate your solution without seeing it. So can't tell you 100% if it's legal or not. What I can tell you is based on what you've described, this, and this probably falls under this category, and it's probably legal or it's probably not legal, that type of thing. So you'll get an answer, but you're never going to get, yes, absolutely, go ahead, that's perfect, do it. Because it could be you're describing something that's outside of what they're understanding. They're not seeing it, so, you're going to have to kind of work through that. But it's a great way to get good direction, and I highly recommend that you use it, even if it's just maybe what seems to be a very minor clarification. If you're just not sure, definitely go ahead and send it in. The other piece of this that comes up sometimes is what takes precedence in all of these sort of chunks of rules, because you have the rules of the road, you have your team challenge rules, and then you have your team clarifications, and then you have the general published clarifications. And so you could potentially have some different interpretations in those different things. So the rules of the road are written for everybody's challenge. So these are the general rules that have to be followed. So though it's kind of the first level, the team challenge will trump rules of the road. So for instance, within the rules of the road, it talks about you can use batteries at all times. Within your particular challenge, there may be a specific exclusion of using electricity for any means at all, which kind of trumps the rules of the road. So you have to kind of look to your team challenge to see what's there. And then from there, your team clarifications are going to take precedent over, rules. So like when you get to tournament, you actually are supposed to bring a copy of your team clarifications that you've asked in case there's some questions from the appraisers, and you say, well, here's what they said, so this is what we did. So that helps a lot. And then finally, if there's a published clarification, that's going to trump everything, because typically published clarifications are going to be maybe a little tweaking of it, or sometimes they'll even adjust things and say this is what it actually means, that type of thing. So just keep in mind there's a bit of a hierarchy of the rules as you're reading them. So if you read something in the rules of the road and it comes into conflict with what's in your team challenge, just know that your team challenge is going to trump what you're reading here, which doesn't happen all that often, but sometimes there's specifics, like we kind of use that electricity example where it may push one rule out of the way. So the next piece of this is instant challenge. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because instant challenge is kind of its own creature, and we're actually going to do a whole training on instant challenge. But there is a section in here that just talks about the generalities of instant challenge, and kind of some of the tactical rules about how you do instant challenges and what you do with them. There's a few things I want to point out on these. You know, beyond just those general things, there's a couple rules in here that a lot of people don't realize because I don't think they kind of get into these things this deeply, but there's a few things here. Not every team member has to participate in instant challenge. You need a minimum of 2, but you don't have to have everybody. I don't know too many teams that don't have everybody participate, but I've had a couple of teams where it probably wouldn't have been a bad idea because we had a team member that just wasn't particularly interested in, you know, participating in the instant challenge in the spirit of the team. But we certainly I have never even thought to exclude somebody off of one of those, and I don't think my team has ever done either. So we've always done it, and I don't think anybody else does. But you do have the option. The other piece of it, too, that's kind of an interesting thing is that the team manager does not have to go into the instant challenge. If the team decides that they don't want you there, they can tell you you can't come in. And guess what? You can't come in. So, like I said, I don't know any team manager that's ever not done it, but I do know a couple that would like to not do it because it's very nerve-wracking to watch your team do these things. And then there's some particulars about the fact that you can't have phones or watches, you know, things like that. You can't bring anything into the challenge that gets used in the, you know, in it. One of the things that I always recommend is that if you have kids that like to wear, you know, baseball hats, that you don't let them wear them into the instant challenge because they could, you know, in the heat of the moment, improv something where they grab the hat off their head and they use it for a prop. That's a deduction. So, you know, why put them in the situation? Just empty their pockets, empty their wrists, empty their heads from stuff like that, and it'll help a lot. The other thing that's in here that it doesn't talk a lot about, but it's something that's worth noting as we're going through this, is that your role in the instant challenge, when they're actually in the instant challenge, you have no role. You literally just sit there with your, you know, you sit on your hands and you try not to smile and laugh and grimace and make facial expressions because you're not allowed to. But when you're practicing, you know, week to week, you can absolutely what we would call interfere when they do instant challenge. So if they're doing performance practices and skits for instant challenge, you can stop them and point stuff out all the time. If they're building, you can stop them and point stuff out. You can even show them how to do it. You can even help them do it. There's no interference in instant challenge because when it comes time to apply the skill, they're 100% on their own. And so those things will certainly help them if they apply those skills that you've given them. So I know the question kind of came up earlier about can you help them with their performance? When they're practicing their central challenge, no. When they're practicing instant challenge, yes. Kind of a sneaky workaround, I agree, but it's a great tool because what you'll find is that as they're practicing instant challenge, they will start to develop some skills, and a lot of times those will spill over into what they're doing in their normal skit for their central challenge. And you can help them with the skills of building stuff and doing things. And so you can definitely involve yourself in the practice of instant challenge. It's just when you get to the actual challenge itself at tournament, you are essentially a total non-entity at that point. You know, and there's a little bit more in here on instant challenge. It's not a ton, but a little bit. Like I said, we're going to spend some time on that at one of the other training sessions and really kind of do a very deep dive on this piece of it. So, you know, more to come there. Last section, I think we have 2 sections after this, but there's some good stuff in here that talks about kind of the procedure of the tournament, you know, what you need to do for registration, kind of how the central challenge functions, that, you know, you're going to have to go and check in and provide your paperwork, and, you know, kind of explains a lot of that stuff that as a new team, if you've never been to a tournament before, you don't have any idea how this stuff works, so you're definitely going to, you know, want to spend some time understanding this. You know, for teams that have been through it before, it's an interesting read because some of the stuff you might go, oh, I didn't know we could do that, or I didn't know that was allowed. That's interesting. So definitely kind of take a look through that. One of the things I always like to point out in this particular section is when you're moving your scenery and your props around, parents, friends, anybody can help them move the props. That is not interference. It's absolutely allowed. when it's not allowed is basically you as a parent carry things into the performance area, if you will, getting them, they're getting ready to launch. You basically drop the prop in the performance area, they put it where they want it, and then you're done. So you can't touch it once it's there, and you can't sort of direct them where to put it. You essentially are just hired help at that point, and they're telling you where to put it and what to do. But that's allowed. The other thing that's in this section, which kind of spills over into a lot of other, it's a little bit of an obscure thing here, but something to think about. Each tournament is only required to give you the space that's listed in your particular challenge. So your performance area, if it says it's 10 by 10 feet, you very well may wind up with a performance area that's bigger than 10 by 10 feet. And I know most of the tournaments we do our best to give you as big a space as we possibly can. But you could run into the minimum. I know one of the first years my kids did technical, and it's a 20-foot by 20-foot space. We were in a space where it was literally like 20 feet 4 inches by 20 feet 0 inches, and that was all the space we had. And so it made it a little challenging because the launch area got a little funny. And so as you're practicing and thinking about those things, make sure that that's part of what you're thinking about, is that everyone does their best to give you as great a space as you can have, but just know you might not have it. The other thing to keep in mind when it comes to a space perspective is that you're only guaranteed a standard doorway to get stuff through. Now, some tournaments you may be going through huge double doors. It may be like a warehouse door where it's 10 feet wide. You just don't know where it's going to wind up. And, if you do already, great, but you don't know what the state tournament's going to be looking like. You're not sure. So just keep in mind that when you're building stuff, don't build something that's, 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. Because what are you going to do if you get to a doorway that's only 3 feet? That would be a terrible thing to have happen, because there's really not a lot you can do to fix it other than break it apart right before you got to go into your challenge, which will stress your kids out. It'll stress you out. That's a bad thing. So just another one of those things, easy to keep in mind now, hard to fix if you get to the spot and you can't do it. So actually, one last question here. I wanted to talk about this. It's a little bit out of order here, but questions of appropriateness and conduct at tournaments. The spirit of DI, this program, the purpose of this program is to teach these kids in a way that's fun, that challenges them, that encourages them. And to me, from what I take out of this program, is that it encourages those things to be done in the right way. And the right way is to have healthy competition where you are cheering for everybody. You're rooting for every team to do their best. You're not picking on every team going, oh, those guys cheated. Well, that's not fair. We got a crappy score here. That's not what this is about. If that's what your team is about, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And if you've got parents that's the way they are, that's going to be something that you're going to need to kind of rein in and make sure that they're aware of it. The idea of this is to have a blast. Some teams are going to do better than other teams. That's the way it is, but you want every team to do the best that they can possibly do. So conduct at tournaments, you are highly respectful of every team, helpful if need be, encouraging always, and that's the way we do it. We don't badmouth other teams. We don't badmouth the volunteers who are judging and appraising. They're there volunteering their time just like you are, so everybody lighten up a little bit and have some fun. And there are, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there are deductions for unsportsmanlike conduct. So if you got a team that's doing that, you're going to get dinged for it. You're going to be asked to stop. And we've had issues in the past where some teams, because of their manager, didn't get on board with that. And at the end of the season, we asked them to not come back because they weren't doing it right. And it takes away from the experience from everybody. So it's a little bit of a sidetrack here, but it's a big one for me, and I think it's important for everybody to understand that's the way that we try and run this program and try and make it positive and fun, despite the fact that it is a competition. So it's a tough balance, but I think we do it pretty well. So The last one here is the questions of appropriateness. I talked about this a little bit earlier, and there is a piece in the very back of the rules of the road. And I'm going to give you the exact page number because I really think it's important. Not the very, very back, actually, but it's pretty far in the back. It essentially talks about, it's on page 34, and I won't read the whole thing to you here, but essentially what it says, it's very well written, and really what it talks about is that teams should use good judgment and remember that all performances should be appropriate for all audiences. So that's one thing you got to be careful with. But that being said, we also do encourage kids to push the envelope and to go places they're not normally going and to take chances and risks. And sometimes when kids take risks, they're going to miss, and they're going to do something that's, maybe they're going to take on a skit topic that's a little inappropriate, or maybe they're going to say something in their skit that rubs you the wrong way, or somebody in your audience rubs the wrong way, and we don't want that to happen. But at the end of the day, if there's a place we have to err on the side of, we're going to err on the side of those kids are going to have a chance to do what they think they need to do. And if that is offensive to somebody in the audience, that's unfortunate, but the organization is always going to support your team's right to express themselves. Now, that being said, I don't think that, there are lots of scenarios where you can imagine that teams are going to be, where it would be blatant and inappropriate, but so we're trusting everyone to kind of be cognizant and thoughtful of what you do, but, I've seen skits where I'm scratching my head going, oh, that was not good. They shouldn't have said that, but you know what? They said it, and we move on, and we support that because I think that that's important. If they feel like they can't do that, then what else are they going to feel like they can't do as they're attempting their solution? And then they're going to take that forward into the world, and that's defeating part of the purpose of this program. So just to got off my soapbox for a minute there. I just think that's an important thing to make a mention of, and that it's embedded in how we try and run this program and what we try and do here. So. Last section of this piece is the scoring section. That's real kind of hard data and stuff, and it talks a little bit about the scores, and it talks about how scores get scaled. I recommend that you take some time to understand this with your team. It does make a difference. There's a difference between the subjective scoring pieces and the objective scoring pieces. An objective scoring piece would obviously be something that did you do it or did you not do it? You get a point every time your machine does X, okay, and you can get up to 40 points for that. So if it does it 40 times, you get 40 points. It's pretty simple. Or there's all or nothings. If the costume change happened, you get 5. If it didn't, you get 0. The other piece of it is there's subjective scores. What was the what was the innovation of that? What's the creativity of this? What sort of dramatic impact did that have? These are things that are variable, and there are rubrics and ways that the appraisers do these things. I highly recommend, if you really want to understand how that stuff does, to be an appraiser, and kind of understand that, and you can kind of ask your appraiser, because they're not going to be in your challenges, kind of maybe give some general explanation of how are you guys building these scores, because it's a pretty good system. It's not perfect, but it's a good system. And then there's a difference between a raw score and a scaled score. So your team will get its raw score. So out of X number of points in each category, you'll get the points that the judges kind of average into. And then that raw score will get compared against everybody else's raw scores, and then essentially in each category. And it explains this a little bit in here, so I don't want you to think you're going to have to understand this in my 30 seconds of explanation. But then essentially it's going to scale each person's raw score to the highest raw score that's there, and that highest score will get 100% of the points in that category, and then each team below that will get a percentage based on how they did relative to the team that did best in that category. And then typically each challenge will have multiple categories within the challenge. And so, each one is a little bit different, so I don't want to kind of dive way deep into this because I think it's a discussion for another day, but there's some good talk about it in here. There's also some discussion in here around what kinds of deductions you can run into. Honestly, deductions are not something that think the appraisal crews look for to you know, we got to get some deductions in there. It's not particularly common that you run into deductions. The big things that you can have for deductions, one is for interference, and sometimes the kids will sort of tattle themselves out because, oh yeah, the coach helped us do that. Not that they're looking to do it, but you know, that happens, and you might get a point or 2 or 3 taken off or something. You can have points off for things where you're violating the rules, you know, or you didn't do something in the right order. And then the last piece of deductions would be unsportsmanlike conduct. And we talked about that already, where you're, you know, you're intentionally doing something that would not be proper, or you're disrespecting other teams, or you're showing a lack of respect, that type of thing. So, you know, like I said, deductions are not super common, but they do happen. And so there's, you know, some talk about them in here. And then for some of the scoring, you do have the ability to appeal if you feel like your team has been wronged, or you feel that there was a misinterpretation by the appraisers about something that you did. I've seen those appeals go to the positive, and I've seen them go to the negative, where the appraisers go, no, that's not what it is. This is what it is, and this is how we interpreted it. Sorry. Or, hey, you know, you're right. That actually is a good point. Let's think about it, and we'll, you know, let you know. And sometimes they will go ahead and award them points. The one area where you are not allowed to appeal is on the subjective score pieces. So you can't say, oh, well, you only gave us 18 out of 30. That should at least been 25. That is never going to be something that there's going to be conversation around. You know, unless there was a gross of what actually happened, then perhaps you could bring the whole thing up more in general. But it's really going to be more around the objective pieces that, you know, hey, they said we didn't do this, so they said we crossed the line. We didn't do that. We did this. So those are certainly things that you can do. And that would be something that you would do at, you know, after you get your scores back, and, you know, kind of have conversations. So that's certainly something you can discuss that with whoever's running your challenge at the tournament, and kind of talk through that with them if that's something you're interested in, you know, something that's happened and you're curious to find out how that goes. So before we get into special awards, Dick, thought we'd go one last break here for questions. I take it there are none. Dick, you on mute?
Sorry, yes, I am on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, this was a question. I did answer it and send it out to everybody, but then I thought in the back of my mind, this year, are they allowed to have any timing devices like watches or anything in the instant challenge room?
No,
I thought those were disallowed.
Those have been disallowed now. I think this is the 3rd year with
yes.
no watch.
Yep.
No watches of any time. The kids can ask anytime they want during the instant challenge how much time is left, and the appraisers will have to tell them. But they are not allowed to bring timing devices into the instant challenge at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is how technology is advanced.
Yeah.
Now watches can actually have cameras in them.
Yeah, they can have tons of different things, and
right.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. But now her question again, it's also another interesting one. A team may involve different roles as noted in the team roles on the roadmap, you know, task manager, performance manager, timekeeper, etc. Now, during an instant challenge, if one person their job is to keep track of the time and sort of manage the time of the rest of the team members so they keep on track, does this get less points for not everyone contributing to the challenge and sex? And I wrote back that I didn't think it would, because it's actually, that's time management is part of the solving of the challenge.
I agree. And I think sometimes when you have larger teams where you have, you know, 6 or 7 kids on the team, depending on what challenge you get in that instant challenge room, it can be difficult to involve all 6 or 7 kids in the actual solving of the challenge. So it's not always a bad idea to have one of the kids, you know, kind of in that role, and they can certainly, you know, I think if you're concerned with that kid not having a big enough role, you can certainly maybe give them something else to do where they're, you know, they're maybe the one that's watching the rules and making sure that the team's hitting all the points that they need to hit. and kind of just being the person that sort of walks around and just checks on everything and making sure everyone's doing stuff. So if maybe one kid's having a tough time with one piece of it, they can alert the other kids, hey, it looks like we're having a little tough time over here. Can somebody spare some time over here to help? And just sort of be the general organizer. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, checking in, okay, how much time is now? Could you tell me, I'm going to check. Okay, everybody, 1 minute left. That's a very important role when it comes to Instant Challenge. Now, do you want to dedicate an entire person to just that role? Depends. Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the person, depends on your team. It may be one, like you said, one of these things where you combine it with other things. But I don't think that's necessarily something where you're going to lose points for teamwork because everybody's involved. I think a lot of times you see teams where you have some kids that are less involved in the active solve of the Instant Challenge, and so that might be the perfect role for them.
Okay, now there's one other general question. This doesn't really have to do with what we've been talking about, but do mandatory parent volunteers, I think she's talking about what now we call officials.
Yes.
For the event as a whole or for the team itself on tournament day, they're assigned for the event on a whole. Do you want to elaborate on that?
I'm not exactly sure I follow the question.
Okay. I think I know what she's talking about. That the parent volunteer is actually volunteering to help with the tournament, either be a door monitor or
Gotcha.
help with a certain tournament task. And it can be 1, 2, 3 hours depending on the tournament. And it's not a volunteer for your team.
Right. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, you're performing some role to support the entire tournament. Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
Okay, there's a few more here. Only if the team asks the IC, the appraiser will tell them the time right?
Correct. Yeah, the appraiser will not, the folks running the Instant Challenge will not voluntarily say 1 minute left, and count down or anything like that.
Okay. Can they use time devices during the central challenge to keep track of time or only as a prop?
Yes, they can do both. Mm-hmm. I think I know a lot of teams do that where there'll be 1 or 2 of the kids who are real particular about timing on things and they'll be running a watch.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. The issue is mainly with Instant Challenge because of they wanting to keep the security of the challenge because we use these challenges, the same challenges are used throughout the country.
Yeah, it's not about them knowing what the time is. It's about, unfortunately, some people trying to misuse their technology in their watches, or they bring in their iPhone because that's their clock and it's recording those types of things. So yeah, right. The amount of time is not the secret.
No. What if the kids don't understand the task given to them? Can they request for details?
During an Instant Challenge, yes, they can ask for clarifications on any piece of it. They generally won't stop and really explain it to them, but there are times when if a team is drastically misinterpreting what has been asked to do, so if they're trying to build something or do something that's just they completely missed the point of it, the appraisers will typically kind of say, here's what the rules actually say. You might want to take another read on them. Something. I don't know exactly how they would do it. I've not been in a team challenge where it's happened to my team, and I've not, obviously we don't see other teams do their Instant Challenges, but I know that has happened, and I know it's in part of their training that they want to make sure that the team's at least attempting what they're supposed to attempt. So if the team drastically misses it, they'll point it out. And they can ask questions throughout the entire Instant Challenge anytime they want. Whether they get an answer or not depends on the question, but yeah, they can definitely ask questions anytime.
Okay, this question, does the team see a written copy of the Instant Challenge, or are they only read out loud to them?
No, there's always a written copy of it
Yes.
in the instant challenge, always, and usually multiple copies so the kids can all look at them.
Mm-hmm.
They can't take it with them, but there's always ones in there.
Will the tasks be according to their age?
Depending on your tournament, they'll typically try and do age-appropriate challenges so that, yeah, so a high school level team is going to have something that's typically a little more complicated versus a elementary school team. So, yes.
Yeah. In fact, the challenges, when we get them, there's a choice of about 40 or 50 instant challenges, and they're grouped into age groups. So the challenge masters take that into account. So only elementary will get elementary level ICs. And let's see, scroll down.
So Dick, while you're scrolling, I know we are right at 8:45 here. So in the interest of time, I just want to kind of finish up with a couple quick comments, and
okay.
then we can finish up with the last of the questions. I want to get to everyone's questions, but I also want to let everybody go if
okay,
we've all got other lives to lead here. So the last kind of point here I want to talk about this is how you help your team get the use of this. We talked about a lot of points and a lot of places here to look at and consider and things like that. And I jokingly said read this thing 3 times and take notes. I'm really not kidding about that. Read it a lot, read it over, spend time on the sections you're not sure about, and take notes. Have your kids do the same thing. Now that's an age-appropriate task, so if you have 3rd graders, you don't give them a copy of it and say go home and read it. You're going to have to read through it with them. You're going to have to spend some time with them on it, have them talk about it, have them understand it. As the kids get older, it's a great tool to have them go home and do. New teams, clearly you got to read it. If your team's done this before, I don't care if you've done it 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, you send that copy home with them and you give them some homework on it. Some of the kids on my team have been doing this for 8 years now, and I sent the copy home with them and I said, you come back with 3 things that you have pulled from that you either didn't know or you got an idea from the rules of the road. Because what the kids will do is they will read these things and they will come up with ideas because of the topic of it. It's like, oh, I didn't even know we could do that. That's a cool idea. In the expense reports, there's a thing that talks about 1-day rentals. And a couple of years ago, my kids read through that. One of them went, hey, does that mean that we could do 1, 2, 3? Well, yeah, I guess that's what it says. Well, then maybe we will. And sure enough, that idea wound up in the Central Challenge that year, and they're probably going to go back and dip into that same strategy again this year because they read something in the rules of the road and it spurred on an idea because it said something that you could do. We've had other times where it talks about things that you can't do. And so you want your team to be real students of the rules of the road. The thing that I love is watching my kids go through check-in and having, maybe a less experienced somebody check in telling them, oh, that's not legal. And we always keep a copy of the rules of the road with us and go, oh yeah, look, they're on page 22, see, it says it right there. Oh, I guess you can do that. Because the kids have read it enough times and they understand it. So make sure that they're reviewing it, and make sure they're reviewing it for a purpose. They're not just reading it, because if they're just reading it, they're just going to blow across it, and they're not really going to understand it. They're not going to digest it. So spend some time with them on it, and give them kind of some purposes when they're reading through it. Like, hey, come up with some interesting things here, or you know what, here's a paper copy of it. I want you to bring it back, and I want to see where you made some notes and maybe some highlights and some things like that where you saw something that was interesting. So that way they've at least read it and they've paid attention. So, because it is a great tool. It has tons of good stuff in it, not only to help you stay out of trouble, but also to spur your team on to some cool things that you maybe didn't think about. So I strongly recommend you take the time to read it. I know it's a little dry, but if you're reading it the right way, it's actually kind of cool and kind of exciting and can drive a lot of good stuff. So Dick, any other questions that you still had out there that we need to get to?
Yes, they're very quick ones. Does the team have to use all the materials given to them in the IC?
No. Depending on what the challenge says, sometimes the challenge will award points for creativity of materials used. Sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll give instructions on exactly how many materials you should use. Sometimes it won't. So that's entirely varies by the challenge, but you absolutely do not have to use all of the materials that are given for you. Just really, if it's a task-based thing, you're trying to accomplish the task first, and then you're kind of going for style point second.
Okay, this one, if the team are a group of second and third grade, will they be considered Rising Star or not?
They will not. They will
third grade, no.
Yeah, third graders will be, you basically compete at the age level of your oldest team member. So if you have third and second, you're considered, elementary school level. If you had all third graders, I mean, I saw this 2 years ago, we had somebody who was a fifth grader, and his little brother and 3 of his friends were on this team together. It was 1 fifth grader and 4 first graders, and they competed at the elementary level. Craziest thing I ever saw. It's fun, but
I actually,
that's the way it goes.
I actually know of a team this year that will have a first grader, a fourth grader, a fifth grader, and a sixth grader.
There you go. There's a middle school team.
Yep. Okay. After the IC at the tournament, can it be shared with the assistant manager? And let me give the answer on this one. No, it can only be only the people that were in the room can discuss that challenge.
And I know that seems harsh, and I know that a lot of parents will be like, that's ridiculous. They can't tell me about this. What is that teaching my kids? The reason why we do that is because, like Dick said a minute ago, is that every other affiliate, every region gets the same list of challenges that they use. And so you don't want to take the risk of somebody talking to somebody else who maybe knows somebody from another region, or even at the tournament, you're talking about it and something overhears. I don't know of any teams that have done it, but I'm sure it does happen where somebody does it on purpose, but it's typically more like on accident that they're just talking about it and another team hears about it. And so that other team, gets put into this weird position where they may know something about the instant challenge, so then they have to go tell. And, it's just easier. Just don't talk about it. And that's cut it off at that point.
And that's the last of the questions.
All right. Well, very good. Well, I thank everybody for spending the time. I know, like I said, it's a busy life we lead. So I hope everyone got some good stuff out of this, picked up a couple of tips. I'm sure you've all already got your rules of the road open, and you just can't wait to dig through that 50 pages of glory for the next hour or so here before you go to bed. But enjoy, and best of luck to everyone and all your teams, and thank you for what you do to support this wonderful program. I know what an effort it is. I know what a battle it can be to do these meetings week after week, but you're doing great work, and we thank you much. So have a good one.